Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 11th of October of 2024. Today we have a lots of very interesting updates, so let's start. And the most important updates are coming from the Kursk direction. First, let's talk about the article that was posted about the Commander-in-Chief of Armed Forces of Ukraine, Syrsky. Today he stated that the Russian armed forces have transferred about 50,000 soldiers to the Kursk region. This was reported by the Commander-in-Chief in a documentary of Suspilne. According to him, the overturning and weakening of forces took place in the Zaporozhye, Kherson and Kramatorsk areas. This fully correlates with the currently known data on the movement of troops of Russian armed forces in August-September of this year. The situation in the Kursk region remains difficult, but under control. It was a difficult and tense night. The defense forces of Ukraine are indeed carrying out stabilization actions, but it has not yet been possible to regain control over everything that was lost. The Russian armed forces suffered losses during the assault, so it will be difficult for them to gain a foothold. So that was stated by Commander-in-Chief Syrsky. Now let's talk in details what exactly is happening right now, because the Russians gave their own report regarding the situation on the ground. And first let's talk about the official statement that was made by the Group of Forces North. And the Russians are saying that as a result of offensive operation, the Russians managed to break through the Ukraine defense belt in the vicinity of the village by the name of Lyubimovka. So this is the village of Lyubimovka, and as a result of offensive operation, the Russians managed to take under control 5 settlements. This is very important. The Russians managed to liberate 5 settlements in the Kursk direction, and the most important, the Russians managed to encircle more than 2 battalions of Ukrainian army. Furthermore, the Russians are saying that they managed to cut different supply and support roads. Once again, according to Russians, they managed to liberate 5 settlements, and they managed to encircle 2 battalions. Now let's talk about the situation on the ground and the next steps. Telling the truth, I don't expect that during the next few days we're going to see significant changes on the ground, or we are not going to see additional Russian progress in the direction of Sudzha. Most likely this is going to happen, but not today, not tomorrow, and not the day after tomorrow. Once again, during the Russian counteroffensive, there was a very interesting situation. The Ukrainians are saying that when the Russians began their offensive, in some points, the forces of artillerymen of Armed Forces of Ukraine and FPV drone operators were the first line of defense that were forced to fight with the Russian mechanized forces, BMP, tanks, and so on. And obviously this might happen just in case if there was a process of rotation. So once again, while the Ukrainians were conducting rotations somewhere in the area of Lyubimovka, the Russians probably got this information as a result of reconnaissance operation, and they began the full-scale offensive. And yesterday we got report that the Russians were using up to 30 vehicles in that operation. And as a result of offensive, according to the Group of Forces North, the Russians managed to encircle 2 groups of Ukrainian forces. And as I understand, the Russians are saying that the first group of forces was encircled by the Russians on the territory of the settlements by the name of Matveyevka and on the territory of the settlement by the name of Olgovka. Later we got additional report from some pro-Russian reliable source that currently on the territory of this village we can count up to 3 platoons of Armed Forces of Ukraine. So 3 platoons, that means it's around 1 battalion. So 1 battalion of the Armed Forces of Ukraine was encircled by the Russians on the territory of this village. Basically, the Russians, when they were moving along the main road from the village of Korineva towards the village of Zeleny Shlях, they managed to cut the main supply roads, and now the Ukrainians can't move through the forest because the forest and the fields under complete fire control. So just they don't have any other option. But where is the second cauldron? Where is the second encirclement? And as I understand, and according to different mappers, the Russians also managed to encircle the Ukrainians between the villages of Lyubimovka and Tolstoy. So this is the second area of the concentration of the forces of the Armed Forces of Ukraine that were encircled by the Russians. As for this direction, there are a few problems. First of all, the Russians control Zeleny Shlях, and the Ukrainians can't evacuate using this road because Zeleny Shlях is under complete control. Furthermore, the Ukrainians can't evacuate in the southwest-eastern direction because when moving this road, there is like a river of snagas and water reservoirs and water barriers, and Ukrainians, of course, will not be able to cross them. So this is like not some like like 100% encirclement. It's like half encirclement by the Russian forces, and the rest is and the rest positions and the rest encirclement is water and natural barriers in face of river by the name of Snagas. So this is the situation on the ground, and most likely during the next few days the Russians will try to destroy these two cauldrons and to force the Ukrainians and these two cauldrons to surrender, or they will stay there forever. Furthermore, during the day we got a lot of very interesting and very weird reports from Ukrainian sources, and even this information was confirmed by pro-Russian resources that during the previous 24 hours, not previous 24 hours, but since the beginning of Russian counteroffensive, the Ukrainians conducted several counterattacks. And the next few days, the Russians once again will be focused in destroying these two cauldrons, one on the territory of Volgovka, another one on the territory of Tolstoluk. And the Ukrainians during the next days are going to conduct several counterattacks with the purpose to unblock their forces from these cauldrons and to save as many as possible personal and armored vehicles. So this is the situation that is going to take place during the next few days. Of course, the Ukrainians can stop and the Ukrainians can do nothing. Maybe it would be smart. The Ukrainians should, as I understand, to try to build another defense belt between the villages of Maloloknya, Viktorovka and Sverdlikova, and probably just to make different maneuvers to force the Russians to think that they're going to counterattack and to unblock, but most likely the Ukrainians will not be able to rescue soldiers that currently appeared in the cauldrons. Now let's move further and let's talk about the southeastern part, because from the southeastern flank of the Kursk direction we also receive lots of very interesting updates, and according to different mappers, mainly according to pro-Russian mappers, as a result of offensive operation the Russians managed to encircle the village of Kurakhove itself. So currently the Russians reached the river of Psol to the southwest of Kurakhove, and the Russians managed to reach the same river to the northwest of Kurakhove. Most likely during the next 24 hours the Russians will begin full-scale offensive operation in this direction with the purpose to force the Ukrainians to fall back. And after the village of Kurakhove, the Russians are going to move further in the west towards the village of Guiva and then further towards the village of Oleshnya. If the Russians are able to, let's say, to go through these territories and to attack the village of Oleshnya, this can lead to complete collapse of Ukrainian defense in Sudzha and to creation of the biggest cauldron ever since the beginning of the special military operation, with around 35,000 soldiers, maybe 5-10 soldiers inside of the cauldron and around 20,000 soldiers around in the vicinity of Sumy. We're talking about reinforcements and reserves. Now let's move further. Let's talk about the Glushkovo area. Today the sources reported that the Russians also launched several counterattacks in this direction. As a result of Russian offensive, they managed to force the Ukrainians to fall back from the territory of Russian Federation completely. Just some territories inside and around the village of Novoput still remain under complete Ukrainian control and nothing more. So it's already nothing. The Ukrainians lost around 95% of the territories that they managed to capture since the beginning of the Glushkovo offensive operation. So, and that's it about the Sudzha direction. Let's wait for additional updates. Once again, the Russians now are going to be focused in destroying of two cauldrons they managed to create. Now let's move further and let's talk about the Kupyansk direction, because during the previous 24 hours we got additional changes on the ground. The Russian sources published the video of how they were attacking the Ukrainian forces between the villages of Kislovka, Kotlarovka, Pishana, Tabaevka. In this video we can see the significant number of Russian armored vehicle and personal carriers that were attacking Ukrainian positions. Then we can see how the Russians landed in this area and began clearing these tree lines. Based on this video we have adjusted this part of the map, and later we got another video from pro-Ukrainian sources of how the Ukrainians were FP withdrawing the Russians a little bit further in the eastern direction. Based on these two videos we have adjusted the entire region, and currently these are the changes on the ground in comparison between the 10th of October and 11th of October. We see that this direction is pretty active, and most likely the Russians are planning to take everything under control until this rockade between the road N26 and the railways that goes between Kislovka and the village of Pishana. So this territory most likely is the primary target of the armored Russian Federation for the next weeks. As for the Kupyansk itself, city of Kupyansk itself, during the previous 24 hours, we continue receiving the significant number of artillery and aviation strikes all over the entire agglomeration. The Russians are trying to destroy ammo depots, warehouses, headquarters, and temporary deployment points. Now let's move further and let's talk about the Pokrovsk direction. We haven't received anything special about the Chasov Yar direction or about the Sivers direction, just the regular things. The next important area is the Pokrovsk direction, where the Russians continue their offensive operation in many directions. First of all, today the pro-Ukrainian sources Deep State confirmed Russian progress in the western part of the village by the name of Nikolaevka. According to neutral mappers and according to pro-Russian mappers, this territory was captured by the Russians a long time ago, and just now we received geolocation from a map update from pro-Ukrainian sources. As for pro-Russian sources, by the 11th of October, some Russian reliable sources reported that as a result of sabotage and reconnaissance operation, first Russian groups managed to answer the village of Promen, and currently there are very heavy clashes already on the territory of this settlement. So summarizing everything, we can make a conclusion that currently the Russians control something like this. And if this information is correct, then we can say that the official battle for the Pokrovsk agglomeration has begun. Because if the Russians can take under control Promen, most likely they will move further in the Moskovska, then they will cut and take under control all this dense network of the fortifications, and they will just cut this territory in many pieces. Now let's talk about the city of Selidove, because the most important updates are coming from this territory as well. During the previous 24 hours, the Ukrainian sources published the video of how they were counterattacking the Russian forces on the territory of mine of Kurakhove that is located in the northeastern part of the city of Selidove. In this video, we can see the Ukrainian BTR that was attacking Russian forces in the buildings on the territory of mine. So based on this video, we have adjusted the map, and telling the truth, most of the mappers have adjusted their maps exactly in this part. This is from one side, but from the other side, we can make a conclusion that most likely the territory of mine and the territory of the landfill still remains under Ukraine control. We're talking about this area. If we go back to map, the video was showing us the following. The Ukrainians were moving using this road, and the Ukrainians entered exactly this part of the mine, and somewhere from this point the Ukrainians were attacking the Russian forces that were located in this building and the Russian forces that were located in this building. After the Ukrainian vehicle was empty, the Ukrainians retreated towards the mainland. Based on this video, we have adjusted the map in Russian favor in this part, and we have returned the eastern part of Selidove in Ukrainian favor. So these are the changes on the ground in comparison between the 10th of October and the 11th of October. Furthermore, I would like to point your attention that the Russians are pretty active, and the front line is very dynamic in this area between the mine of Russia and mine of Kurakhove. So this is the progress on the ground just for 3 previous days, and based on this progress, we can make a conclusion that currently the Russians are moving further in the direction of the mine of Kurakhove and the landfill, and most likely very heavy clashes are going to take place in the upcoming days, or maybe there are already very heavy clashes on the territory of this industrial zone. Now let's move further and let's talk about the Kurakhove cauldron. We have very important video and very important geolocations from this territory. First, let's talk about the fire control that the Russians managed to establish over this cauldron. You know that there are lots of roads, lots of different let's say roads, evacuation, rotation, and supply and support, and most of these roads in the end are coming to one point. For example, as you can see, there are a lot of roads in Gornyak. They're moving in the southern direction, they're moving in the western direction. There are roads that are going from Kurakhove to the south, then back to the west, again to the north. We have some roads that are coming from Novoselidovka in the southern direction. So the significant number of roads that Ukrainians are using them for logistic purposes, but there is one important minus. All these roads are coming to one place, and we are talking to this square, to this triangle, or to the square that is located in the vicinity of the village by the name of Stare Tserny. So everything, if Ukrainians want to send anything on the territory of this agglomeration of this cauldron, first in any case they need to move through this intersection of roads. because there is railways and it's very difficult to cross these railways with the regular light vehicles. And as you can see, also there is a water barrier that goes from the village of Sontsovka further in the direction of Tsukurine. So this is something like a barrier that's very difficult to use to cross with vehicles, tanks, and so on. So just one road that goes through the village of Stary Tirny. And as you can see, during the previous few days, the Russians were moving in this direction, and currently we can make a conclusion that the Russians managed to establish complete FPV drone control over the heart of support of Ukrainian forces in Gornyak-Tsukurina cauldron. Let's take a look at these geolocations. They are very important. In this video we can see just a Russian drone that was flying towards Ukrainian positions. As you can see, there is a dense network of the fortifications, significant number of kilometers, and as a result of attack a vehicle was destroyed. In this video we can see a Russian drone that was patrolling the territory. This is very interesting. The Russians, we used to see videos, got used to videos when we see that the Russians send drone for a certain purpose. There is a vehicle, then there is a drone that will attack this vehicle. But as for this case, we can see a drone that was just flying above the territory without any movements. He was just waiting for something. And when a Russian FPV operator discovered the movements of Ukrainian vehicles, he started moving with the vehicle. When the Russians managed to get additional information that this is military vehicle, the Russians destroyed and attacked this territory. So once again, after the first drone attacked the vehicle and destroyed, another drone came to the same area and continued the patrolling operation. This is unique tactics, I'm telling you. So the Russians control everything. The Ukrainians have no chances to get additional forces here. As you can see, Russian drone took place of the previous drone and started flying above the territory, patrolling and waiting for another movement from Ukrainian side. Maybe the Russians start using AI for these purposes. I don't know. Maybe it's not even a Russians or FPV drone operator. Maybe it's not even human. Maybe it's already AI that control the territory and that seek for some movements and then attack this. A little bit further in the western direction, we have another video of how the Ukrainians were trying to redeploy through the only possible road some vehicles, reinforcements in the direction of Kurakhove, Gornyak cauldron, but the Russians managed to discover the movements, and as a result of FPV drone attack, that vehicle was destroyed as well. The Ukrainians were trying to abandon the vehicle, but not everybody managed to do this. And further in the western direction, we have another episode of how the Russians were patrolling the territory over the village of Shevchenka, seeking and searching for Ukrainian vehicles and forces. And when the Russians managed to discover several, let's say, light vehicles, the Russians began bombing and attacking them. So this is the reality. And we got additional video from the village, from the city of Kurakhove. As for this territory, the Russians mainly are seeking and searching for communication equipment, for radars, for some constructions that Ukrainians are using for communication purposes, for the internet and so on. And as a result of several attacks, the Russians managed to destroy the radar. And now let's talk about the changes on the ground. Today, the Minister of Defense of Russian Federation reported that as a result of clashes, the Russians managed to establish complete control over the village by the name of Ostrivske. A few days ago, we got the video of how the Russians just were entering the territory of this village, and the video how the Russians entered the territory of Ostrivske appeared on the 4th of October, so almost a week ago. And just now, on the 11th of October, the Russian Minister of Defense confirmed this information completely, and the sources published the video of how the process of attacking the village took place. And as you can see from this video, the Russian attack took place exactly on the 3rd of October. So probably during the previous week, since the 3rd of October, the Russians have been clearing the territory, trying to force to the rest of Ukrainian forces to fall back from the territory of the settlement. And in this video, we can see the huge and the biggest Russian armored vehicle convoy heading along the railways towards the village, how the Russians were attacking the Ukrainian positions, how the Russians were moving through the Selidove prison number 82. This is the prison, by the way, how the Russians were entering the village of Ostrivske from the southeast, and how the Russians managed to reach the most western part of the settlement. So based on this video, based on the Minister of Defense report, we have adjusted the map in Russian favor. And also about the Minister of Defense report, we also got very interesting update regarding the village of Zaryane Pershe. If you remember, A few days ago, the Minister of Defense of Russian Federation reported that as a result of clashes, the Russians managed to take under control the village of Zaryana I. And we've been discussing the situation for many times, and I told you that when talking about maps, there is no such a village like Zaryana I. And most of the mappers, including pro-Ukrainian, pro-Russian, and neutrals, made the conclusion that most likely the Minister of Defense was talking about Zaryana and probably or about this part, the northeastern part of the village. We're talking about the territory along the Franca Street. And based on that report, a lot of mappers have adjusted their maps in Russian favor and colored almost everything inside of this artillery pocket. And the thing is that, but probably, and we discussed this situation in the previous video, that probably the Russians made a mistake. And we were waiting for additional confirmations, and I told you that if we receive additional confirmation that the Russians haven't established control over this territory, we will adjust the map back in Ukrainian favor. And I was waiting for this Friday, because usually on Fridays, the Russians, the Minister of Defense of Russian Federation, provides daily reports, daily summaries about the situation on the ground. And usually during the Friday's reports, they include information about the settlements that were captured by the Russian forces. And today the Russians reported and confirmed that as a result of clashes, the Russians took under control the village of Zhelana II, and this event took place a few days ago. And the Russians took under control the village of Grodovka. This situation also took place somewhere on the 7th of October. But the Minister of Defense of Russian Federation didn't say even a word about the village of Zaryana. So most likely the Russians made a mistake during the week, and during the weekly update they decided to improve the situation and to fix this issue and that mistake. And based on the Minister of Defense report, we have adjusted the map back in Ukrainian favor. We are talking about artillery pocket. So let's compare the map. For example, this is the situation on the ground on the 10th of October, and this is the situation on the ground back on the 11th of October. So we are waiting for additional clarifications. So this is the situation Kurakhove Gornyak direction. The situation is very critical. Let's return back to the village of Ostrivske. We have already talked about the Russian full control over the territory, and as for different pro-Russian sources, the Russians, as a result of offensive operation, managed to move even further and to take under control the first buildings and the first blocks of the city of Kurakhove. So we are talking about this residential part, because this is already Kurakhove that located on, let's say, Russian side of the river of Ostrivske. So once again, summarizing everything, according to different pro-Russian reliable sources, this approximately the territory under complete Russian control, and this situation obviously will lead to complete collapse of defense of Ukrainians in Maximilianovka, and sooner or later the Ukrainians would be forced to fall back from the village due to complete absence of supply and support from the mainland, from the town of Kurakhove. So this is the situation. So we are waiting, maybe even by the end of the weekend, that Russians will take under control the village of Maximilianovka completely. As for the South Donetsk direction, we haven't received anything special. The Russians are regrouping and preparing themselves before the beginning the full-scale offensive in the northern directions towards Kurakhove and maybe towards the village of Velika Novosilovka. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes to my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.